Hey there! I've got a new vintage Boy Scouts of America knife to show, and this one is a PAL Blade Company. I'm going to start a playlist called Scout Knives of the Greatest Generation, borrowing that term. I don't know if it was coined by or just made famous by Tom Brokaw in his book of the same name. But the idea was that GI generation made tremendous sacrifices and were very modest about it. So think about, your grandparents or your parents if you're older, and some of the sacrifices that they made during that period of time, World War II, for the rest of us. World War II was from like September of 1939 for the U.S. involvement to like September of 1945. I know other countries, Great Britain, China, were in it long before that, but for the U.S., you're really spanning, from like September of 39 to September of 1945. So I'm thinking, any Scouts is for boys, or was for boys, from age 11 to 17. So I'm thinking, you could be a 17-year-old in 1944, a Boy Scout, and then the next year, 18, you could have been in the Army. In 1945, you could have gone to Europe, the Pacific, and fought and even died in World War II. So I'm looking at, any official Boy Scout of America knives made in 1930s or up like to 1944, and I'm calling those Scout Knives of the Greatest Generation. And the thought is that this knife actually could have been owned by a young, healthy, patriotic young man who later went on to fight and possibly die in World War II. So or make some kind of sacrifice. So it's just really cool to think. You really can't talk about PAL Blade Company Boy Scout knives without first talking a little bit about Remington Boy Scout knives, because Remington sold their cutlery division to PAL in 1940. So PAL had their equipment, their designs, and their materials, and for a while they just made their knives that looked almost exactly like the old Remington knives. As a matter of fact, in those first years, you could find PAL knives that had mixed blades. Some of them would have, say, PAL Blade Company on them, and others might say Remington. And it wasn't until PAL changed their name to PAL Cutlery Company that the knives stopped looking, exactly like the old Remington knives. So you can see here the similarities. And the first one is the shield, at the first class shield here. And I think the shields are really identical. They may look a little different here on camera because the Remington shows more wear. But there you have the motto, "Be prepared." But let's talk about some of the differences too while we're looking at the outside of the knife. PAL Blade Company was the first company to use plastic scales on Boy Scout knives. So you can see here you have bone and here you have plastic. The other big difference that I noticed right away was, while the Remington has brass liners and spacers, the PAL Blade Company knife has steel liners and spacers. And it makes the knife, that and the plastic scales, which tend to look a little thicker, make the knife seem a little thicker and heavier. Also, I'm not sure about this, but I'm pretty certain that these are steel bolsters, not nickel silver. They just have a different look to them. They don't have the same kind of a brassy sheen. And they did clean up a little different, polish up a little different, and this one actually had a little spot of rust on it, red rust. So if that had been nickel silver, it probably would have been a little spot of green corrosion or something, in my experience. The Remington is just a little more refined, I think. Here we can look at the bail, and you see that it's rounded and finished and has some decorative lines on it, whereas the PAL Blade Company knife is just a stamped out piece of wire that's pinned on there. And then we can kind of look at the different tools. Let's look at the Remington blade first, and particularly the etch. I think the Remington blade stamps, rather, are really pretty cool. They'll say either Remington or Remington UMC inside a circle. Sometimes that's script. And then above and below the circle or to the sides, it says Made in and then USA. There usually is a model number on the back. This one happens to be R3333. very similar to RS3333, which I see more often. And then the PAL Blade Company. It says PAL Blade Company made, and it's hard to see, but underneath it says in USA. And again, later that was changed to PAL Cutlery, apparently. And the knives took on a little more of their own character. There is no model number on the back. Using my reference book, 600 Scout Knives by Joseph Richard Kerr, I have learned that this is BSA number 1495. It was produced circa 1941 to 1947, so it kind of fits in my time frame there of up to 1944 for calling a Scout knife a Boy Scout knife of the greatest generation. The Remington that I'm showing you, this R3333, it had a production run of 1935 to 1939. The blades are, on these of course have both been worn some, but they're pretty similar in size and shape. Let's just go through the rest of the tools. Screwdriver cap lifters are virtually the same. They're very long type, and they do not have that extra bump at the bottom that you often see on some of these old ones. They both have the old two-part can opener, sickle style can opener. Again, to me, the Remington just looks a little more finished. Often on the back, the Remingtons will have Remington and script across them here. This one just does not, and the PAL has nothing on it. And then finally the punches, or awls. Now the PAL Blade Company one has a rather large cutout. To get to that, bigger than the Remingtons. And the tools are different. You can see that the Remington is quite a bit longer. I may not show up too well on camera, but trust me, it is longer. See how it's finished differently at the bottom, cut differently. And again, often you'll have another stamp here. It will say Remington in a circle. Just Remington, no, not Remington UMC. And again, the PAL doesn't exhibit any kind of stamping there. Okay, so there's a look at the new addition to my Boy Scout knife collection, a PAL Blade Company. Looks a lot like the Remington I've already shown you in a previous video, because they inherited their cutlery division and kind of just kept rocking and rolling with what they had. We've also looked recently at a Universal Landers, Frary, and Clark. And I have another very interesting ulster that I can show you, and another Remington on the way. So stay tuned as I go through the Scout knives of the greatest generation. Thanks for watching, and have fun collecting.